Welcome to the Iowa VISTA monthly meeting for April 2017. Today's topic is interviewing tips and tools. My name is Jancy LaFollette from the Iowa State Office, and I will be your presenter/facilitator for today's call. The PowerPoint will be available at the end of the session, and the session is being recorded. If you object, you can disconnect now. Our Iowa VISTA monthly meetings are designed to highlight a topic and provide a forum for discussion. They are not intended to be all-encompassing, so please make sure to review the additional resources provided on the topic, which may include tutorials, instructions, and other documents. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. I'm not going to run through these because this is a sub-recording of this call, as the original call was not recorded due to technical errors. Today's agenda, we will be reviewing the stages or doing an overview of the stages of recruitment. We're going to be talking about screening options as well as interviewing tips, selection criteria, and resources that are available to you. As you all know, I am a strong believer in I don't have to know everything, I just have to know where to find everything. I'm going to direct you to the VISTA campus and to the resources on the VISTA campus under the on-demand for supervisor webinars. Attracting Successful VISTAs is a webinar for supervisors that I'm going to encourage everyone to check out as well. It goes in a little bit more detail about the topics that we're going to be talking about today. So I want to make sure that folks are aware of that session available to them. In addition, we do have plenty of VISTA recruitment resources out on the VISTA campus. All recruitment resources can be found at that first link shown. The recruitment planning resources, as well as the on-demand tutorials, the one that I just highlighted was one of them. So please take some time to review these resources available to you. Just a few reminders. Everyone should know which PSO event you are recruiting for at this time, and all service opportunities should be live on your MyAmeriCorps portal system. So we want to make sure that folks are aware of that. If you haven't, please make sure that those service opportunities are up. The July PSO Classic is our largest event recruited for, with the nominations due on June 12th, excuse me. You can post service opportunity listings prior to your continuation application being approved. All of you are in the continuation application process currently, so if you haven't already posted your service opportunity listings, please make sure that you do that at this time. You can edit the postings at any time, however, just make sure that you alert the state office that changes have been made and that reapproval is needed, as we do need to approve all the postings that go live out on the website. Just a reminder, recruitment does take time, so we do encourage you to start now. And again, just making sure that you are familiar with the recruitment process. There are some additional recordings out there from our monthly calls, so if you need to, please refer back to them. The Iowa VISTA recruitment overview, kind of the stages of AmeriCorps VISTA recruitment process, is what we're going to be spending a little bit of time on. VISTA recruitment is a multi-step process that can be both rewarding and challenging for those of you who've gone through it before. We encourage you to utilize kind of this set of examples and tasks to create a customized recruitment process that fits the structure and policies of your organization. So these are tips and tools from a variety of AmeriCorps VISTA sponsors, but again, making sure that you're using a plan that definitely fits your model and how your business operates. We've talked about planning and we've talked about marketing prior to today's call. Today we're going to spend some time on the screening, interviewing, and selecting components of the recruitment process. So we want to make sure that folks are aware of kind of how the recruitment process works, and making sure that folks are aware of kind of there is a structure, there's a method to our madness as we roll through this. So for screening applicants begins from the point of first contact and continues during the interview process and is completed once you have checked the applicant's references and they have cleared through the CNCS criminal history check process. Through screening ensures that applicants qualify for VISTA service, will persist throughout the service year, and most importantly are a good fit for your community and your organization. Through screening, we do encourage folks to list kind of out what their selection criteria are. So really, what are you looking for? What type of candidate are you looking for? The selection criteria for applicants, there is kind of a cheat sheet out there if that's something you're interested in reviewing. So that is a first place. Really, who are you looking to fill your position? Next, we're going to encourage you to make a list of items that are required for the applicant file. And again, this can be kind of your own list, but making sure that the application is completed on the MyAmeriCorps system. If you request a resume, make sure you have that included. Most programs don't, but some programs do request that resume. A sample living allowance budget. That's something that folks are utilizing more and more. So our VISTA candidates have an idea of really what it takes to live on the living allowance. Any supplemental questionnaires that you might be asking or additional information that you might have about your organization, make sure that those are available and you kind of have quick reference to them. And then any other information about your position or your organization, such as, do you need a card to serve? Is there something, a skill set that specifically you're looking for? So making sure that those are included kind of in that checklist as you're going through the screening process, so you can cross-reference that application and making sure that those folks are matching up. Creating a list of or rating scale of your must-have skills, your nice-to-have skills, and your optional skills for the position is also something, kind of a screening tool that might be of interest to folks. So we want to make sure that people are aware of that as well. We do encourage you to work with your sub-sites or your host sites. If you're a multi-site program, you hold the sponsorship, but there are multiple sites working under your grant, making sure that they are also kind of on par with what you're doing, and making sure your screening process, everyone knows what that screening process is. So if you're pre-screening and then passing those applications along, or if you're not pre-screening at all, making sure that your sub-sites know that and have a vested interest in kind of how this process goes. In addition, we do encourage you to create a list of questions to gauge if your VISTA candidate will be able to commit to a year of service. A few questions can be like, are you considering other service opportunities at this time? When you see the living allowance, do you feel you can live within the budget for your service year? Living allowance is a huge question, actually. We have a lot of members who accept the position and then realize that they might not be able to live on that living allowance. So that's a very good question to ask folks, and making sure that they really take that into consideration. Another one is, how do you feel about relocating to a new community to serve? If they're not local and they're relocating to the community, sometimes that can be a little overwhelming for folks. They're excited about it, but then once they kind of get into it, they're a little concerned. So we just want to make sure that you guys are spending some time thinking about questions that you can really ask candidates to gauge their commitment throughout the service year. Not necessarily questions, your interview questions, but really engagement questions, making sure that those are included in the screening of your applicants. A few screening resources or additional screening resources can be found on the VISTA campus at the recruiting section. These are some great resources that are available to you. So I did roll quickly through that, but I wanted to make sure that folks have those screening resources available to them. Next, we're going to be talking about interviewing. So in interviewing, really during the interview process, your goal is to get to know the applicants. So you've screened them, you've selected a few to bring in for interviewing, and now the goal is really to get to know those applicants. Sometimes you might have to do more than one interview, so there might be a first or a second round of interviews as needed. But there's a few things to note about interviewing. So first, we want to make sure you're prepared. Go into the interview making sure you're prepared, making sure you're organized, and having information in front of you to address questions that the candidate might have, but also making sure that you are asking your questions, and so it's not an afterthought, but actually kind of a process as you roll through that. If there's multiple people interviewing, making sure that you're prepared to delineate who has what questions or what aspect of the interview process each person is going to be taking on. If the interview is going to be done via Skype or phone, kind of how that process will work, and making sure that your technology works. So that sounds like a simple thing, but just making sure that you're taking some time to get yourself prepared for the interviews. We do encourage a standard set of questions for all interviews. This way, it's you have a set standard for the questions that you're asking all of your candidates, and you are making sure that you are addressing all the questions that you have. If you have an old set of standard questions, we encourage you to revamp them or relook at them, reassess them at this point. If you've never used a standard set of questions, there are questions that are available to you out on the VISTA campus, and I encourage you to take a look at those. In addition, We also encourage you to have a VISTA interview checklist. So this is a list of what you want to cover with each candidate, making sure that you know what you want to make sure the highlights that you're hitting. The what to know before beginning service document that we request, that the Iowa State Office requests during the nomination process, is a good document to kind of help guide you through some of those discussion points about the VISTA program. They don't necessarily have to sign off on it during the interview screening process, but we do want to make sure that that's just kind of a point of check for you to making sure that you're kind of covering all the bases on that. So just keeping that in mind. Interviewing VISTA applicants may be a different experience from interviewing potential employees. So just make sure that you're looking at that as this is someone who's going to be with you for 365 days, making sure that you have your criteria set and you're taking some time about how you're going to be looking at this interview. So some projects find it helpful to use phone or Skype, as I said before, or to do a pre-screening interview and then to bring the candidates in for a full interview later. So those are some things that you get to determine how you want to be interviewing your candidates. When preparing to interview candidates, we want to make sure that you're covering the expectations with the VISTA candidate about what the interview will consist of, and talking about the confidentiality of the interview, names and the roles of the interviewees participating. So making sure they know who they're talking to, and if you're doing a phone call, who's on the call. Definitely cover the living allowance. As I said, that's one of the main reasons why folks kind of back away from the VISTA program once they accept. And so we want to make sure that that living allowance is highlighted. The physical location of service, we want to make sure that folks are covering that. You might be based in Des Moines, but they're actually going to be serving in Sioux City. And so we want to make sure that you are letting them know where their physical location is. Housing options, if you guys provide housing, if there's other housing options, making sure that those folks are aware of that. And then just an explanation of the capacity building role of VISTAs. This is something that we've actually ran into this year as a lot of members, for some reason, they were researching both AmeriCorps State and National as well as the AmeriCorps VISTA program. They had a little confusion about kind of, is it hours versus days? Is it capacity building versus direct service? And so making sure that they understand that this is a capacity building role and what that means. So it's the behind the scenes, and what that takes. So that can be a unique kind of a unique challenge for some of our VISTA members. Obviously covering the expectations of the VISTA position as well as providing a copy of the VAD to them during the interviewing process is a great way really to make sure that you're hitting all those high points during the interviewing process. One of the things that I do want to talk about, you're going to hear more about, is behavioral questions. And so a behavioral interview is something that's been around a while in the HR, the human resources world, but we want to make sure that folks are looking at behavioral interviews and behavioral questions, and incorporating that into the VISTA interviewing process. So the purpose of a behavioral interview is to really ask the VISTA applicant to pinpoint specific instances in which he or she exhibited a particular behavior in the past. So behavioral interviews can be a good tool to identify a VISTA candidates who have behavioral traits and characteristics necessary for success in the VISTA position. If you if you haven't already, really you need to decide what skills are needed for your VISTA position, and then you'll ask the questions to find out if the candidates have those skills. So you first, of course, before you go into a behavioral question or a behavioral interview, you do want to make sure that you know what skills you're looking for. So that is a predeterminant of going into this. The questions, so you provide a scenario and you ask the candidates to talk about what they would do, what they have, not what they would do, what they have done in a similar situation, not what they think they would do in that type of situation. So the question is always, how did you behave, not how would you have behaved or how will you behave? To ask the VISTA candidate to identify at least 2 specific examples of how they addressed that type of scenario in the past. So keeping that in mind, behavioral questions are a great kind of indicator of behavioral traits and characteristics, and making sure that they're a good fit for the organization and they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform the assignment description. Behavioral questions are really outlined a lot in that first webinar that I highlighted to you guys from the VISTA campus, the Attracting Successful VISTAs. They dive into that a lot. They dive into the criteria of what you're looking for to really set up those behavioral questions well. So I want to make sure that folks are keeping that or considering that as they're looking at their interviewing process. Finally, in interviewing, we're really going to look at illegal questions. So various federal, state, and local laws regulate the questions a prospective employer can ask a job applicant. And the same goes with VISTA. Questions for VISTA applicants, so that can be on the job or on the job application. So if you have a different application than us in the interview, either that by person or phone or internet, and during any testing process, must be related to the position for which they are applying. So the focus must be on what do I need to know to decide whether or not this person can perform the function of this position. Questions should be position related and not used to find out personal information. So this goes for sponsoring organizations as well as sub sites. We want to make, or host sites, we want to make sure that folks are not asking illegal questions or questions that are trying to find out personal information about the VISTA member. And those questions can be around race or gender, religion, marital status, disabilities, ethnic background, sexual orientation, etc. Age is one that always does come up, and though the application will tell the age, because it is a requirement that you must be at least 18 years of age to participate in the AmeriCorps VISTA program, and it's a national service program, not necessarily an employment opportunity. We do want to make sure that folks are aware that they shouldn't be diving into that age question any further than it's on the application. So making sure that folks are aware of that. If you do have applicants who ask that question about age and why they ask for the date of birth, it is because this is a national service program. And it is a requirement of the program to be at least 18 years of age. And so that's why it's on that application process. So this does come up every once in a while, but we want to make sure that folks are aware of that. For the interviewing resources, the VISTA campus, again, part of the recruitment resources that are out there, there are some interviewing resources, so you can find additional information out there. During the live session of this, there was a few things that were brought up that they felt would be great aspects was really the script. So having a script before going into the interview process, making sure everyone kind of knows what role they have. So they thought that was a kind of a great highlight. And then laying out those questions ahead of time. So making sure that the questions are all the same for each applicant. You've thought about those ahead of time and really making sure that those are laid out and you have those available. So those are good to keep in mind, especially if you're working with sub-sites. Making sure that they are well versed on what questions you've asked already or what questions they need to be asking, or you guys can come up with a standard set of interviewing questions. So I do encourage you to support your host sites in that as well for interviewing your potential VISTA candidates. So we're next going to move into selecting. So to select the best qualified applicant and to make an offer that you are comfortable with. So this is part of the selection process. So really selecting the best qualified applicant for the position. We want to make sure that you guys have done your due diligence, you've screened, you've interviewed, you feel comfortable, and you're ready to select that person. Part of this is conducting reference checks, and you see the multiple explanation points there. This is one of the things that I cannot highlight enough, is making sure that you take the time to conduct reference checks. Each application does have at least two references that they must complete. Some of those are completed well, some of those are pretty general. And making sure that you're doing due diligence. If you don't feel like you're getting enough information or you don't feel that there's substantial enough references, feel free to contact them, call them. Their contact information is provided. In addition, you'll also see in their application, in their experience section, they should also list supervisors from previous work experiences. Feel free to contact them as well. So do some time in checking references. I cannot stress that enough to make sure that folks are aware of this. Applicants, another thing to just remind you of during the selection process is that applicants may need time to make a decision. So we want you to be comfortable with the selection process, but they also need to be comfortable with that decision making process as well. So we have deadlines, and we have, we're in crunch time, and those deadlines have very little wiggle room around them. And so please keep those in mind, but also make sure you're planning accordingly. So we want to make sure that the applicant, if you offer it to them on a Thursday and the deadline is Friday, that might be a little too quick for them to make a decision. So make sure you're giving them a few days to make that decision if possible. Obviously, we know sometimes things come in, last minute and you're like, oh, they're a great candidate and they'd love to go and we can get it all done in 2 days. That's fantastic. But if possible, make sure that you give them some time to make that decision. And then finally, be prepared for the candidates to have really that they might change their minds. This happens a lot sometimes, especially in highly qualified candidates. They, you interview them, they interview great, they have a great interest when you talk to them. You go to extend the offer to them, and they're like, yeah, I'm not really interested. And you're like, what the heck just happened? So be prepared that they can change their mind, and they will change their mind. It is a good idea to have a backup plan. So if you're lucky enough to have a couple applicants come in, make sure that you haven't sent them on their merry way and said, no, we haven't selected you, until you have that application or that first applicant actually accept the job offer or the VISTA position. I apologize there. And so it's just a good idea to kind of have some, obviously identify your top picks, but also possible backup candidates if possible. So there are a lot of factors in determining whether an applicant, either recruited nationally or locally, is best suited for your specific VISTA position. So there are a few selection criteria that I want you to consider, and this is not meant to be all-encompassing, and it should be viewed as guidelines for recommending applicants, not necessarily something you have to do, or this is something you need to look at, but just keep these in mind. So first is obviously the applicant must meet really the minimum standards of eligibility. So they have to be at least 18 years of age upon entering the VISTA training. There is no upper age limit, but at least 18 years of age on the first day of PSO. They must be a U.S. citizen or have a lawful permanent resident status. They should not be listed on the National Sex Offender Registry. So the NSOPW, which is a National Sex Offender Public Website check, is actually ran by me. So once you nominate a candidate and they come in, we run the NSOPW before we actually select them for service. You most certainly can run that ahead of time if you want to. That's up to you. It is a free check. It is a public check, and so you do not necessarily need their consent to run that NSOPW, but I want to make sure that folks are aware of that. The candidates must be willing to submit fingerprints for the criminal history background check. So we want to make sure that folks are aware, potential candidates are aware that we do fingerprinting checks. Sometimes folks don't want to give fingerprints, so that is a requirement of the process of the VISTA programming. They must be in a position to offer full-time service for 1 year without regard to regular working hours. So we always say, you work Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30. However, no, we don't always say that, but whatever the working hours are of their site. But there might be some need for night or weekend work. So we want to make sure that our members are aware of that during the selection process. We want to be able to relate any previous education, training, military, or work experience that demonstrates relevant skills or interests and necessary to perform the VISTA assignment. So it might not necessarily mean that they've done this exact same thing before, but they have relevant experience that they can transfer to us. And then be willing to really participate, serve on a full-time basis, live at the living allowance. This is a poverty program, so live amongst the economic level of low-income people, and that the living allowance is non-negotiable. So these are things that when you're selecting someone, making sure that they understand that criteria. We also want to make sure that you're keeping candidates engaged in the time between selection and their actual service starting. So in VISTA, this is really known as the dead zone, this kind of time where you've selected the candidate, they've said yes, but they actually don't start PSO for another 30 to 45 days. And so we do have folks who withdraw during that time. So something else comes up, they're not really sure what the next steps are, they get nervous, and so they withdraw. And so, a few ideas to keep folks engaged is inviting them to attend organizational events or meetings or gatherings if they're local, sending them background reading or news articles or stories about your organization or about the program that they're going to be working with, connecting them with other Vistas who are currently serving with your organization. So, if that's something of interest to them, assisting them with finding housing if applicable, or other services in the community. Making sure they're completing the required pre-service paperwork, so the terms, conditions, benefits tutorial, the onboarding paperwork, the direct deposits, all that fun stuff. Sending them VISTA tutorials from the campus that you feel might be beneficial for them to know. There's one out there, Living on the Living Allowance. That's one that I always like to highlight. Encouraging them to join your social media site so they can follow your organization on social media or their service site on social media. And then really checking in on them on a regular basis to make sure that the documentation is turned in, they're good to go, making sure they don't have any questions. Again, this is not to bombard them. These are just a few ideas to making sure that we're keeping folks engaged once we've selected them to when they actually start. So a few things to consider before selecting or nominating a VISTA candidate. And we've kind of touched on these a little bit in the past, but I want to make sure that I am giving due diligence to these topics. So consider the following criteria before you recommend a VISTA applicant. So references. Be sure the references meet the application's requirements. So there should be 2 completed references on the application. You can call if they're not completed. You can do kind of override the system and call, but make sure they are completed. Call the reference. I'm sorry, you can call the reference and do a verbal one over the phone. You should also look for a balance among professional, educational, and personal references. So if there's just personal references on there, you want more of a professional or educational, feel free to seek those out. Try to get an understanding of the applicant as a whole and follow up with phone calls that may be necessary. So don't be afraid to call folks who are listed as references or previous supervisors. Employment. Look at past job experience that may be relevant to the VISTA assignment, especially if there is some demonstrated expertise gained from previous position. Remember to take note of experience that includes leadership positions and working with the public. Education, matching the applicant's academic background with the sponsor-specific needs is highly desirable. Courses or degrees completed by the applicant should be reviewed in the context of the VAD, so making sure that they have, say, the education and the skill set to do what you're asking them to do. Military status, this is a significant experience or education gained through the military, should be fully considered in recommending a VISTA applicant. Other factors to consider is the type of discharge the person received. If the applicant enters VISTA before completion of military service obligation, the VISTA may need to transfer to a new reserve unit or request deferment of their reserve obligations until the end of their VISTA. So military status is one of those things that we definitely want you to consider, but if they're still active, making sure that they're aware of what that means to them. Community service and volunteer activities. So in some ways, this information is the heart of the VISTA application. So really, we want to look at community service and volunteer activities, right? Homemakers who have a history of serving their communities, liberal arts majors who have worked with diverse groups of people, retired persons who have a history of volunteering for a worthy cause, have been proven to be outstanding VISTA members. So I don't want to downplay community service and volunteer activities, because that is where a lot of great resources are found and skill sets are developed. So keep that in mind. We also want you to spend a little time on the motivational statement. So read this portion of the application carefully. Ideally, an applicant's motivation is a balance of really their desire for personal and professional growth and why they're doing VISTA. Um, a lot of people join VISTA, or not a lot, everyone joins VISTA for a variety of reasons. And so I do review each of the VISTA applications who are nominated, and I do review the motivational statement. And so at any point in the application, if a red flag is raised, that is something I ask for you guys to clarify, but I want to make sure that you guys are reading that statement because that can give you a sense of if they're committed to this for the long term, this is something they're really interested and engaged in, those types of things. And then we also want to look at their readiness to serve. So gauge if the applicant is truly ready to serve with VISTA for an entire year. They understand that it's a full-time commitment. They understand the breadth of the benefits, the amount of the stipend, and really that they possess the personal effectiveness and the competencies that you're looking for to be able to hit the ground running. So one of the things that we hear from folks is, oh, my VISTA member takes a lot of supervision and it took a lot of time to get them up and going. And it does. These typically are young professionals who haven't really had a professional experience before full time. And so that can be a challenge for them. But it can also be a challenge for the site. So making sure that they have the skill set that you can work with them to kind of get them up and going. A few things to keep in mind in addition to what we've just considered in this list. So while it is not appropriate or legal to ask whether an applicant has a disability prior to the recommendation or to select or not to select, a person with disabilities are eligible to serve with VISTA if they meet all the requirements. So in fact, individuals should be encouraged to serve. So any special needs must be reasonably accommodated in accordance with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended. And we want to make sure that folks are aware of this. So in addition, you should also not be making any assumptions about a request for reasonable accommodation. That is up to the candidate to actually let you know if they need a reasonable accommodation, and the applicant, the member actually, once they're selected, to let you know. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. That they are encouraged to apply. If you guys, reasonable accommodations is something that you should be aware of and you should be willing to provide to them if needed and if requested. So we want to make sure that folks are aware of that and not to make assumptions about what they do need. Children and dependents, again, it is not appropriate to ask prior to selection whether an applicant has children or dependents, and the applicant should be advised, however, that CNCS assumes no financial responsibility, including health support for dependents of the VISTA. This comes up a lot as people are really looking at the overall VISTA program and if it's right for them and if it's right for them at this time in their life. They do look at that, and that's always a question that we get at our offices. Do the health benefits cover my kids, or do the health benefits cover any dependents that I have? And it does not. Those are individual benefits, and so we want to make sure that folks really do get the full scope of what the benefits that are provided for them. So there is child care subsidy available, but again, that's if they don't have any other child care subsidies available to them. So we just want to make sure, again, that folks are taking these things into consideration as they are looking at which candidate they would like to bring on board. Selecting resources, again, available at the VISTA campus. One of the highlights from the live session that we did was screening the screening interviews with sponsors and sites and making sure that the sites are vested in the process. That was a good tip that was presented during the live session from one of our multi-site large intermediary sponsors, is that they really do want to make sure that those sites are vested in the recruitment and screening process. And so the sponsor does a pre-screening interview and then the site does an interview. And so that the sites really do have an idea of what the member can do and all that fun stuff. So that was just a helpful tip from one of our large multi-site programs. So keep that in mind if you are working with host sites, that they are involved in this process as well. And they understand what the process is. So you guys get to determine what that process is, what works best for you, but make sure that they understand that. So member retention starts with intentional recruitment. So take time to recruit the best person for your position. So really I've said it before, this has been on a previous PowerPoint that we presented for recruitment, but really recruitment retention. So to get that member through the service term, to make sure they're successful, it really does start with the intentional recruitment process. So we want you guys to be intentional about your recruitment. We want you to be intentional about the type of candidates that you're seeking. This is a recruitment timeline. It was supposed to have the classic dates up there, but this of course includes the PSO blends, but we just want to make sure that folks understand that PSOs are subject to change and they are contingent upon the federal appropriation. So nomination deadlines are, our VISTA training unit has done its best to say that they would not change the dates of PSOs once they are established. PSO classics are to be filled first. And then PSO blends if applicable, but we want to make sure that folks were making sure that those invites have gone out, that they should be recruiting, but we will try our best not to change those dates. However, things happen. We had folks recruiting for April, and we had to actually put 2 PSOs together. The dates themselves did not change, but the VISTA members, instead of going to the Chicagoland area, they actually had to go to LA for the training, and so that does change folks' travel plans sometimes. So I just want to make sure that we are trying to do our due diligence to meet those deadlines, but things do happen. So keep those in mind. And as you all know, this is contingent. Everything is contingent upon federal appropriations. Currently, the federal government isn't in continuing resolution or a CR until April 28th. So wanted to make sure that folks are aware of that. Next is upcoming VISTA trainings from headquarters. So the VISTA campus actually has great resources for VISTA supervisor webinars and leader webinars. On April 18th, so tomorrow, the AmeriCorps VISTA will host a supervisor Q&A or open hours for you guys if you're interested. And then on May 18th, the VISTA member retention 201, responding to member challenges, will be presented. So just to keep you updated for what other resources are out there. Our next monthly meeting is May 15th at 2 p.m. Central. Our topic will be on-site orientation, so the OSAT, or on-site orientation and training, planning and best practices. So this is the on-site orientation and training is a requirement that each of you have in place for each of your VISTA members. And so we will be covering kind of what that consists of, what to look for, make sure it's substantial enough to get folks through the on-site process, and then to make sure you have that in place and are following it. So that's going to be our next session in May. And just finally, this is for more information. I do want to note that our office phone number has changed. The 515-776-4552 is the new general line, and then 515-776-4553 is Vicky, and then 554 is me. So I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware. I did send a notice out, but making sure that folks got that. And then VISTA Campus and our AmeriCorps website, directing folks there. If you haven't checked out the AmeriCorps VISTA website at nationalservice.gov, please do. It actually just went over a big rehaul, and so they have changed that around a little bit, and so please feel free to go check that out. This concludes the April 2017 Iowa VISTA monthly meeting on interviewing tips and tools. Again, I do encourage folks to go back and check out the resources that are available to them through the campus, and Attracting Successful VISTAs is an on-demand webinar that I do encourage folks to listen to at your convenience. So be intentional about your recruitment. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our office. Thank you so much for your time today, and enjoy your afternoon. This concludes our session. Thank you.